Hi everyone, welcome. If you were with me last time, 14 days ago, when we last checked in on my African night crawlers, you'll remember that they were just getting moved out of this somewhat smaller container into this regular size bus bin. And the reason we've got a somewhat reduced size of African night crawlers now, and the reason we had launched off the population into a relatively small size container, was because there were some issues trying to get the majority of the population that I hauled out originally into their new home. Long story short, I had a major die-off. Regrettably, I lost a whole bunch of worms in the process. And what I was able to pull off afterwards was a collection of worms that had managed to survive, which were still left over in their finished castings. And we managed to pull some worms together and launch them off, but it did seem like we had a sufficient quantity of worms there to position them into a somewhat bigger container. And that's how we ended up putting them in here. So I figured after 2 weeks they're probably ready for some more food. What I had done was I spent a few minutes on camera to actually prepare the bin for them. And all we really did was we piled in a bunch of cardboard and prepared bedding and stuff like that, threw in some moisture, and then, oh yeah, some food. So the bin was prepared with some food, and then we simply emptied the green container into here. And I didn't try stirring the material in, so the native material that came with the worms was just resting here on top. So if we were to probe down a little bit, I believe we would eventually get to the point where we would start encountering some of the bedding that I used. So I had cut up a bunch of these cardboard tubes. Those were resting down at the bottom. And then the food was in here too. I can't remember if I had positioned it centrally or if I had spread it out, but it does seem like the material that came over with the worms has sort of settled down into that bedding that I chose, since it is pretty much all just hollow bits of cardboard. This stuff, when I laid it in originally, was all kind of resting up on each other. I knew that it would, pretty much immediately collapse once it got damp and once there was some weight on top of it. So I wanted to come back in here today, 2 weeks later, to see how things are doing. I've not had a chance to check in on these worms. My typical approach is to have a pretty high degree of faith in what's going to happen, so I don't check in regularly. I just pretty much give them their due, and then pretty much hope that things are going to be a-okay. I kind of figured we would blend in the material, sort of just stir stuff up a little bit, and at the same time it would give us a chance to see how things look in here. I suppose maybe we should check the middle, because the middle is where I generally plop in the foods, and I don't really recall offhand what types of foods were used to feed these worms last time. Perhaps we'll bump into a couple leftovers and it'll reveal to us what types of stuff was fed. I mean, here I could see a little chunk of something, whatever it might have been. This also looks like the stem of something, but I'm not really getting a good read on what it is that we're looking at here. I do see springtails occupying the system with the wormies. So I figured after we kind of combine the new material that's down low with the aged material that the worms were occupying, that was layered on top with the worms last time, we could proceed to dropping in a little bit of bedding, a little bit of food, and then that would pretty much be our check-in. Those those Ziploc baggies that were covering the system were just fine, but I figured we would switch over to a piece of bubble wrap, so I had planned on replacing our top covering material, plastic that is, with bubble wrap. I kind of like the way bubble wrap has those air gaps between the bubbles, so if you lay the bubble wrap face or bubbles down basically, then it does seem like you're providing a little bit of opportunity for airflow within the system underneath the bubbles and in between the bubbles. So that was going to be the way I deploy the plastic covering. And I debated on whether I wanted to include additional bedding with today's feeding, considering the fact that the last check-in consisted of them getting, a whole lot of fresh bedding as part of building out the container to have a little bit more real estate for them to occupy besides the material that they were coming over with. So I figured, you know what, why don't we stick to that plan? We'll just use some of this bedding material that I sort of picked out of the lower ends of the bin. There were a few larger pieces of cardboard, possibly some paper here. I don't really recall what types of stuff we had built the system out of, but it did seem like I managed to get my hands on a few larger pieces of bedding that could serve as a little bit of a foundation onto which we can position today's feeding. And when I went over to the freezer, I noticed that the freezer door was ajar. It was pretty wide open. There was probably a good a good inch allowing airflow to come and go. And I really couldn't tell you whether I left it that way last night or at some point today. It's very likely that it's been that way all night. Because this collection of stuff that I received from my mom yesterday was given to me frozen. But when I started feeling the stuff, it didn't really feel very frozen. So it is quite possible that this stuff has had an opportunity to some degree, thaw out. I mean, this chunk here in the middle feels like it's still kind of frozen, but a lot of the things on the outside felt like they were not frozen. So I guess it's kind of a combination of stuff that is and is not frozen. I mean, I checked the ice cube trays and I checked some of the other things up in the freezer to make sure not too many things had thawed out. And it did seem like the ice cubes were all frozen, so that was all in order and stuff like that. So hopefully it didn't really mess things up too much. So that's the feeding right there. And, I wondered about that top coating of paper. Do we just reuse it as is? Yeah, it's something I like to do. I like to try to see how many uses I can get out of one of those things. So perhaps we'll just bring it back at the end. Over here I've got some of this stuff that's known as Kala, I think is what it's called when you see it on the shelves in the store. This stuff was put into that plastic container and given a chance to suck up some water and get damp. And then some of these smaller crumbs I just collected up, and those are going in dry. And this stuff here is pulverized eggshell, which is the worm bin grit that I generally use. And you can see the stuff is kicking up some dust. You don't want to breathe that stuff in. So if you're handling that stuff, definitely be careful and don't breathe it in. It's dangerous. It gets down into your lungs and then it never comes out basically. So you definitely don't want to inhale the dust that comes off of your pulverized eggshells. So I think that's it. We're going to come back in here with the top covering, and now we'll get another chance to see how it looks. I didn't really pay that much attention when I removed it, but it did seem like it might be holding together well enough. It does seem like it's a little different from what I often deploy, which is just one single large sheet of paper, but it seems like here we've just got a little bit of a patchwork, which will be just fine. So, as I said, the upgraded top covering is going to be bubble wrap, and On top of that, we're just going to use this piece of cardboard, which is really just meant to provide the worms with a little bit of darkness and shade beneath it so that they feel comfortable hanging out down there without the light scaring them away. So I'll take care of getting stuff cleaned up and put away. I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. Before I go the really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.